Full Tilt, Chapter 7, Big Blue Mother. I was in a warehouse and I was alone. That was what struck me instantly, being alone. Through everything, I'd been surrounded by others: wild riders on the carousel, frenzied drivers on the streets of Chicago. But the revolving tavern booth deposited me in a lonely warehouse graveyard of battered cars and piles of rusted automotive parts, the waste products of my last ride. The warehouse was huge, at least 50 feet high, with great stone pillars holding up the ceiling and long windows made of hundreds of smaller panes of glass. I could see nothing through those panes, only the sky, casting a cage of shadows on the ground. Yet beyond the windows, the sky was changing. The shades of orange spoiled to amber and a sickly yellow, like the skin of an old bruise. If the booth was a turnstile, then I was already on the approach to a new ride, but I didn't yet know what it was. There was a sound now. It was the swish, swish, swish of something slicing back and forth like a pendulum. As I moved around a pile of junk, I saw its shadow, huge and ominous, as it rose and fell. Only now did I hear the screams each time it fell. Finally, it came into view, a thing strangely out of place within this warehouse. It was the swinging boat, the one we had seen when we first entered the park. It was in the form of a three-masted schooner, and it hung from a single axle supported on both sides. It swung forward and back, with a rhythm that was both hypnotic and nauseating. This was what the ride looked like from the other side, but from the inside, what would it be? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The warehouse had sprung a leak. As I leaned against a pillar, water ran over my hand. I looked down to see myself standing in a puddle that kept growing deeper because the water wasn't just dribbling down the pillar now, it was pouring. Beyond the windows of the huge warehouse, an ocean was rising. I wanted to keep it out. I wanted to keep everything out. The fact that Cassandra had set her sights on me, that I'd lost Maggie and Russ, that my brother kept spiraling deeper into the rides. The windows began to explode inward with the force of the ocean spilling into the warehouse. A whitewater wave rolled behind me, and in front of me was the swinging boat. All my hope rested in the sanctuary of that vessel. The water that just a moment ago was at my ankles now rose past my knees, and I could hear the wave roaring behind me. The wave hit me, washing me off my feet. I reached up and managed to hook my arm around one of the support struts holding up the ride. With the icy water at my chest now, the boat crashed down, taking me under. It dragged me along its rough hull, pressing the air out of my lungs, bruising me, and scraping me across the barnacles until I couldn't tell up from down. When I finally surfaced, the support struts were gone, the warehouse was gone, but the boat and the waves were still there, much bigger than before. If swimming were not my sport, I would have drowned by now, but even so, it took all my strength to keep my head above the waves. The boat, now a life-size schooner, lurched forward and crashed down over the waves with a motion not all that different from when it had been attached to a greasy axle. Up above, a storm raged in a strange sky color. Up above, a storm raged in a strange sky the color of dark mustard. A rope dangled from the bow, and as the bow plunged, I grabbed that rope with both hands, wrapped it around my right leg, and clamped it tightly to the instep of my left foot, just like they taught us in gym class. As the boat rose with the next swell, I was lifted out of the water. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe I just weighed less in this weird world, but I was able to pull myself up hand over hand. I clasped the rope to keep from being hurled off each time the ship hit the bottom of a swell, and I used the upward energy to climb faster each time it peaked until I finally spilled over onto the deck. My lungs were half full of water and my hands were red and raw, but I was still alive and riding. The boat pitched beneath me with a regular stomach-churning rhythm, a feeling that just grew worse with each wave. And with each of those waves, the old schooner peaked, and I heard voices screaming up above. I looked up to see kids, dozens of them, high above the deck, clinging to the web of ropes that hung from the masts and beams. Ratlines, that's the word. They swung from the ratlines. Some of them swung from the beams themselves, and others gripped the tattered fragments of the shredding sails. You know how when you were little, your dad would throw you up and down in the pool until you were giddy with laughter? I know, because it's one of the few memories I have of my father. Well, that's how these riders were, giddy. But when they fell from their high perches doing cartwheels into the sea, nobody was there to catch them. The schooner crested another wave, the bow rising and plunging again. Up above, the riders squealed with joy. Icy water rolled across the deck, washing me up against the foremast. Then a hairy hand grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me to my feet. What nature a fool be, ya boy, rolling around on the deck when there work to be done? The man's face was covered by a heavy beard. His voice, somehow familiar, was masked in an accent that was almost, but not quite, like a pirate's. With his hand still on the collar of my shirt, he hauled me to the railing. Fix your eyes on the sea and nothing else, he told me. Then I caught something huge out of the corner of my eye, almost the color of the waves. I turned in time to see the tail end of a barnacle-encrusted whale, larger than the ship. I was awestruck by the sight. Aye, breach your last to the sun, the bearded man shouted to the whale. The hour and the harpoon are at hand. The great whale's fluke cut a wide arc and slipped back into the water. Oh no. By now, I had a good idea what this ride was. A huge wave caught us, the wake of the whale's breach. It almost washed me away from the railing, but I held on tight. Above us, another unfortunate rider plunged into the frothing sea. Drive! Drive in your nails, O ye waves! To their utmost heads, drive them in! The bearded captain raved. I still had the feeling that this ride was neither random nor the manifestation of someone else's mind. Just as with the carousel, I had a powerful sense that Cassandra had reached inside my head to create this ride, but I couldn't figure out why she had chosen this. I never even liked Moby Dick. Ready to lower the boats! Captain Ahab shouted. Today we take the great blue whale. Don't you mean great white whale? Nay, boy, the blue whale be our quarry on this cursed voyage, the greatest creature on land or sea. She has no teeth to tear a man to shreds like the white whale of which you speak, but she is awesome and daunting prey nonetheless. A loud hiss, and I turned to see the great blue whale surface again, spouting spray from its blowhole. Its huge eye was somehow familiar. Its shape, its color. It wasn't the strange blue of Cassandra's eyes. This eye was speckled brown. I knew if I had time to think, I'd be able to place where I'd seen such an eye before. I watched as the whale opened its tremendous mouth and drew in water. I could see tiny shrimp writhing against the bony lattice in its mouth. See how she opens her mouth to filter life from the sea, said the captain. I'd hate to be a krill caught in her baleen. And all at once, it clicked. Krill. Baleen. This was a thought tugged right out of my mind. I took a good, hard look at the maniacal captain, trying to pick the shape of his face out from beneath his heavy beard. Carl? Then I looked at the sea, at the submerging whale. Mom? Carl put his hand on my shoulder. Keep your wits about you, boy. You can't really be here, right? You're just some figment of my imagination, just a part of the ride, right? Right? He just ignored me, looking out to the sea for a sign of the whale. I struck my first whale as a boy harpooner of 18, but this one here is the great prize, and beyond her there will be no other. Will you help me, boy? No. Yes. I don't know. The bow crashed down again, and as we rose and crested the next swell, I saw a reef off the starboard bow, jagged granite rocks that thrust up through the churning sea like teeth. I could see bits and pieces of other ships in the crevices of the stone monoliths. Follow her into the reef, shouted mad Captain Carl. A sailor at the helm wildly spun the tiller, and the ship turned toward the rocks. Up above me, the riders still wailed with joy as they swung from the ratlines. One of those voices sounded familiar. It was a shrill whoop that I'd heard so many times I could place it a mile away. I looked up. In a flash of lightning across the mottled yellow sky, I saw Quinn clinging to the highest of the ratlines, right beneath the crow's nest. He screamed in defiance of the crashing waves, daring them to shake him loose. Fishing the violent pitching of the ship, I climbed the ratlines towards him. I was almost thrown from the ropes, but I held on with what little strength my fingers had left until I finally reached him high up where the ratlines met the mast. "Toward thee I roll!" the mad captain shouted at the whale with my mother's eyes. "To the last I grapple with thee!" "Quinn!" I could barely hear my own voice over the thunder and wind. I was right next to him now, and he still didn't know I was there. He just kept whooping at the boat as the boat pitched up and down, the motion intensified by the height of the mast. He was oblivious to Carl, our mother the whale, or anything else outside the rush of the ride. "Quinn!" Finally, he turned to me, blinking like he had just come out of a trance. His eyes were wide and wet from the cold wind. "Blake, when did you get here?" There was a deafening blast, and a surge of electricity made my arm hairs tingle. A kid on the foremast had been struck by lightning. His smoking body tumbled limply, missing the deck and plunging into the sea. Then I caught sight of one of the passing spires of rock. Part of the stone seemed to melt away, forming a face. In fact, all over the reef, I could swear I saw giant faces in the stone, the wailing mouths and hopeless eyes of those whose lives were given to the ride. Lightning sparked in the sky again as I realized we were clinging to the highest point of the boat. Then I looked at Quinn's moronically metallic face, dangling chains and rings, all perfect electrical conductors. "You're a lightning rod!" "You're a lightning rod! You've got to get down from here!" "No way!" He returned his gaze forward. "I'm not letting you spoil this. It's the best ride yet." With Quinn, actions always speak louder than words. So I tugged him from the rope net, and we both fell, rolling down the rough ratlines, bouncing painfully off the boom and landing hard on the deck. "The ship's going down," I told him, ignoring my aches from the fall. "How do you know? You don't know everything." "I know the story. One way or another, this ship is going down." I looked around for something, anything that would give us an out. Then I caught sight of a strange, unearthly light escaping from the edges of a closed hatch. I knelt down and pulled at the hatch with all my strength. Finally, it popped open. The light within was too bright. My eyes fought to adjust, and for an instant I got the briefest glimpse of bright chrome gears turning. They were pieces of some colossal gear work that couldn't possibly fit in the hold of a ship. This hatch was a doorway to another place entirely. The works, I thought. It must be the works. Beyond that hatch was the mechanism that ran every ride. But before I could get a better look, crazy Captain Carl slammed it shut with his foot. "Nobody goes below." Just then, the whale breached right beside the ship. "Was that a whale?" Quinn asked, clueless as ever. "What's up with that?" As the whale, with my mother's eyes, came down, the force of its wake threw the ship against the rocks with a shattering of wood. "Blast ye!" yelled the strange blending of Captain Ahab and my mother's fiancé. He threw his fist to the sky. "The madness, the frenzy, the boiling blood, and the smoking brow." "That's it. We're out of here." I pushed Quinn to the railing. "Jump. Now." "Are we going to ride the whale? Is that part of the ride?" "Just jump." I practically hurled him over the side and followed right behind. I hit the icy water. Then, for an instant, I felt something huge and rough brush right past me. I fought my way to the surface, breaking through into the noise of the storm. Quinn sputtered beside me. He wasn't as strong a swimmer as I was, so I tried to help him, but he wouldn't let me. He kicked me away and began swimming toward the rocks. I turned back to see the ship, 20 yards away now, and then a blue-gray wall rose in front of me. The whale breached again, but this time it came down right on the ship. Riders were thrown from the ratlines. The ship cracked in half, and in a few moments both whale and ship were gone into the darkness of the churning sea. A wave hurled me onto the rocks, where brand new faces were appearing. I tried not to look directly at them. I was afraid I'd be too horrified to move if I did. When I turned to look for Quinn, he was scrambling away over the rocks. No! I grabbed him by his collar as we reached a wide plateau. I was so mad, I would have grabbed him by his nose ring if I could get my finger through it. You're not getting away again from me. Why did you have to come? He yelled. You ruined everything. You made me miss the best part of the ride. Best part? What, are you out of your mind? If you went down with that ship, you wouldn't be coming back up. And then Quinn looked me dead in the eyes. Who says I want to? If my temper was a burning fuse, that pinched it right off. My head reeled from what he said, from what he meant. Who says I want to do anything but finish the ride? I took a deep breath and another as I stared at him. The sound of the ocean raged behind us, but right now I could hear only him. What are you saying, Quinn? You came here to save me from this place, didn't you? But who said I wanted to be saved this time? I opened my mouth to speak, but all my words had been robbed from me. What could I say to him? What could I say to my brother who came here not just for the thrills, but for something else? As much as I didn't want to face it, I had to now. Somehow he knew where these rides would end. He knew that once he crossed through the gates, he wasn't coming back. He knew, and still he had come. What's out there for me, huh? Quinn's eyes flowed with tears, and those tears flowed with a dozen different emotions. What's ever been out there for me? When I'm at home, it's like I'm empty on the inside. You don't know what that's like. They say that before someone takes their own life, there's always a cry for help. Sometimes it's loud, and you have to be seriously deaf not to hear it. Sometimes it's just a word or a look, like the look Quinn was giving me right now. I might have been deaf to it before, but that look screamed louder than anything now. I had no skill in talking someone in from the edge, and that space between us was still a whole universe wide. Quinn, it's not your job to save me, so give it up, huh? Please, just give it up. It's not a job, I told him. It's something I've got to do, something that I need to do. But why? Quinn asked. Is it because of what happened on the school bus? I looked away from him. Mom shouldn't have told you about that. She didn't. I just heard. Quinn hesitated for a moment. I thought he might take a step closer. Is it true that you're the only one who survived? I took a deep breath. Let's go home and we can talk about it there. Quinn thought about it and shrugged sadly. Some people are survivors. Some aren't. And how do you know you're not? Just because things stink now and you feel empty inside, it doesn't mean you feel that way next week or next month or even next year. That's just words, Quinn said, getting more frustrated. I don't have the patience to play a game of Scrabble, and I'm supposed to hang on your words for months and years? He looked down. His shoulders dropped. I could see into his works now, the angry pistons, the overheated gears, and that pit inside of him. He kept it so well hidden back home with attitude, but here it was bare and bottomless. A wave crashed behind me. I could feel it vibrating up my legs and into my joints. Sometimes I just want to disappear, you know? Quinn looked around at the tortured faces and the rocks around us. Can you think of a better place to do it? I'll never let you disappear, Quinn. I locked on his teary eyes and imagined that I had tractor beams in mine, that my gaze would somehow pull him in. Come on, I told him. We'll ride out this place together. He took one step closer, then another. I reached my hand toward him. He reached out his, and then the symbol on the back of his hand began to glow. From deep in a cave behind him came the distant, hollow cries of other kids in the middle of one last thrill. Quinn backed away from me. I kind of got used to riding alone. Then he turned toward the cave. I was losing him again. I didn't know what else to say that would get through to him, so I leveled the truth at him with both barrels. You're lying in a coma in the hospital, I shouted. They carted you away in an ambulance, and that's where you are. It was harsh, like waking a sleepwalker, but it stopped him in his tracks. At least that's what Mom thinks, I said, trying to ease the blow. Without even turning to look at me, he said, maybe it's best she thinks that. Then he leaped into the gaping mouth of the cave, and the darkness swallowed him. I sat on the rocks among the silent stone faces with no desire to go on. I could have leaped into the darkness after Quinn, following him to his next ride, but what was the point? How do you help someone who refuses to be helped? Was I supposed to knock him unconscious and drag him out of here? He was already unconscious. There was a flash of yellow light. Far off in the ocean, a new ship appeared out of nowhere, sailing closer. This time, it was a Spanish galleon, somebody else's nightmare. The swinging boat sailed again, filled with a whole new batch of riders, headed towards some different adventure, but the same fate. You're not playing, I heard Cassandra say. She sat on a rock just a few feet away, dressed in a bright yellow silk gown, a garland of flowers and shells woven into her hair. She looked like something from mythology, a beautiful siren luring sailors to their death. You made it through this ride, now move on to the next. Although her voice was restrained, her words still sounded like an order. Why are you following me? You have a park full of riders, happy to hand their lives to you. Leave me alone. Like you said, I didn't come for your rides. No, you came for your brother, but he'll be lost, just like everyone else. Her words echoed around inside my head a few times before catching on some receptive brain tissue. What do you mean, like everyone else? She stood and came closer. 7 rides, each one harder than the last. Think about it, Blake. Are you saying that no one's ever made it through all 7 rides? She turned with only mild interest at the approaching galleon. They're lured by the thrill, and soon there's nothing else. Even though there's a way out of every single ride, they rarely find it or even look for it. They let the thrill consume them. In the end, either the ride takes them or they get caught at dawn. Either way, they never leave. In the sea beside us, the galleon careened along the reef until something huge, green, and reptilian rose from the depths to grab its mast, pulling it over on its side, flinging riders into the sea. If there was a way out of every ride, like she said, these riders had missed their chance. The creature pulled riders from the ratlines with its clawed hands, shoving them into its toothy-filled mouth. Rocks eroded into astonished faces. Here be serpents, the medieval maps all warned. How can you do this to people? Lure them here only to destroy them? It's a matter of balance, she said coolly. What are you talking about? She laughed at me. You don't think this park grows out of nowhere, do you? It has to be built, attraction by attraction, on the spirits of those who visit. A roar from the serpent and the last of the galleon was taken under the waves. So if this park was a living thing, a creature existing in the rift between dreams and the real world, then the riders, all the riders, were merely prey, and I had been watching the creature feed. Cassandra took another step forward. You're afraid. Tell me about your fear, Blake. I won't tell you anything. Please, I want to know what it's like. I want to know fear. As I forced myself to look at her, I could see she wasn't just toying with me. She wanted to know. She wanted to feel what I felt. She studied me. I could feel her pulling at my thoughts, trying to get a hold of my feelings and failing. She didn't know fear. How could she, when the danger was always someone else's? This time, it was I who took a step closer to her. I've always suspected that my life, maybe everyone's life, is like an hourglass in which the past and the future converge on a single point in time, that narrow channel where the sands pass, a single event that defines who you are. Until now, I had thought that the bus accident was that event for me, yet here was a moment not of blind helplessness, but of decision. Everything could rest in the balance of the choice I now made. Without daring to think about it, I reached for Cassandra, pulled her toward me, and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion Well, maybe just a little. But more than anything, it was a kiss of defiance, a fear conquering, do or die act of affirmation, of determination. In the instant that our lips touched, I felt what she truly was: intense heat encased in intense cold, two opposing extremes. But I was neither seared nor frozen by her. I will not die in this place. I refuse to be plunged from existence. I will no longer be at the mercy of these rides. They will be at my mercy. I will make it through all seven, and I will get out. I will be the one. I pulled away, my fear gone. The strength of my resolve was like an engine inside of me. Cassandra smiled. She knew what that kiss meant every bit as much as I did. I accept your challenge, she said. From this moment on, no more games. The next time you see me, I'll be coming in for the kill. Perhaps she could sense my feelings, but I could sense hers. Excitement, perhaps for the first time. I was the ticket to her own private thrill ride. Another flash of yellow light. In the distance, a ship appeared again, this time a Viking ship. I imagined it was about to sail off the edge of the earth or something equally unpleasant. I'm making it out of here before dawn, I told Cassandra. Me and anyone I can take with me. Again, that sultry grin. Knock yourself out. I turned my back on her and marched towards the wailing cave into which Quinn had hurled himself. But Cassandra took her first strike against me unexpectedly. You began riding young, didn't you, Blake? I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't keep myself from hearing. I couldn't keep her words from piercing my brain. And your bus never made it to school that day. It was a shot in the back, not a shot to kill me, but one to disable me. Her words sliced through my defenses like a hot blade, and I could feel it searing deep inside me. Was I that vulnerable? I winced, feeling the blow almost like a physical pain, but I found that I could tolerate it without falling apart. It was finding a whole lot of things I could tolerate more than I thought I could. Before me was a cave that appeared to have no bottom, an abyss of darkness, but somehow that unknown was less intimidating than it had been only a few moments ago. 3 rides done, 4 to go. With my eyes wide open, I leaped into the cave.